Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to deftalks. This is Adi. Why is China refusing to resolve the border dispute with India? This is something a lot of people have spoken about, and they've spoken about it from an Indian perspective. What is happening in India, and how does China perceive it? And we've always looked at it from a very, very tactical point of view, wherein, yeah, we did this, 370 abrogation kara. We started developing infrastructure, so China's got pissed off and they're trying to do something. The second part of it is that China wants to, maintain a hegemony within Asia, and it wants to teach India a certain amount of lesson. What is the reality? What do the Chinese actually say about it? What are their writings talking within China? Their strategic community, what do they say? Is something very important for us to understand before we think about how to resolve or how to actually understand this standoff. I'm going to make an attempt to push across a certain theory that I've been able to research in the past some time. I was lucky enough to get a lot of material, which is there in the open media, by the way, certain Chinese websites and stuff like that, where I could see what they have actually written. And I've come up with this little theory which will try and make some sense as to what is China thinking, or what did China think before it escalated the matter to where we are today. As always, I've got some slides made up for you. And before I get into those slides, guys, please do like this video, subscribe to the channel, most importantly, spread the word. And by the way, just an announcement, just before starting this video, Dev Talks just crossed 22,000 subscribers. My thank you to one and everybody who's been watching and who's part of the Dev Talks family. You can actually contribute to this particular effort by just using this QR code that here to directly contribute to me, or become a member of this particular channel, or send us a super sticker or a super chat during this particular live stream or any other live stream for that matter. Right, let's get into the presentation. This is very interesting, guys. So let's stay tuned. This is going to be a lot of philosophical things, some amount of history, and most of it is going to be based on what the Chinese have to say, the Chinese writings. And these are writings that they do. And before I get into that, I want to tell you all one thing, that the Chinese write a lot about what they are planning. For example, Sun Yat sen book, right? The International Standing of China or something like that, it is called. This particular book was 1922. It talks about the acquisition of Tibet, colonialization of Tibet, colonialization of Xinjiang, and so on and so forth. If you remember Mao Zedong, he used to carry this thing called the Little Red Book. And our friend Xi Jinping also follows supposedly a particular book which is known as the China Dream. It's authored by a PLA colonel called Colonel Ling Ming Fu. The rejuvenation of the nation of China and all those little things are mentioned in there. There is also another interesting book that I found, where I found a lot of angle to the India factor, is called The Science of Military Strategy. This was written in 2013 by the China Aerospace Studies Institute. And this is a study that they have done for themselves to understand what's happening with regards to the situation of security around China. They've talked about Japan, USA, and this and that and the other. They have a small section, about 8-10 pages on India. If you guys find time, please do read that. It's very interesting. It tells you again how the Chinese look at what is India's larger strategy in the world. Now, let me just read this out. Not only is China's India policy shaped by larger rivalry with the US, there also exists a genuine structural problem in India China relations that aggravate discord. We know what the structural problem is. These emerge primarily from China's attempt to keep India hemmed into the region. So, as I said, they don't want India to grow up. There's a stark difference in the kind of Asian regional order that the two countries want, and that's what they want. Is while India seeks a multipolar world, as it is very well clearly set out, with India as one of the leading poles, China seeks a unipolar world, with India not at all being a pole. So, see, this is very important, and this tells you that what is their thought process. And this is going to be explained to you today with the presentation that I have actually made. This is a study recently done by the Tsinghua University, and mind you, the Tsinghua University was developed by the USA and to kind of work with the Chinese back in the 70s or the 80s when the friendship started. More than 8% only, or around 8% of the Chinese only consider India as favorable. And this is very, very important. We need to understand that the favorability of these surveys, and this is a decent sized sample survey where they are taking in Chinese people's opinions about what's happening in the world. Just two little statistics to begin with, to give you the little bit of an insight with regards to what the Chinese and how they're thinking. Is what is China's top priority amongst international security right now? And the most amount of answers went to pandemics and disputes over territorial waters and territory. And on the second side, figure number 25, this is an open source report. You can see it online. It's there, easily downloadable. Uh, what do you think about China's foreign aid, right? So it says 39.1% people say it is excessive, and sorry, 13.6% people say it's excessive, and 39% people say it's slightly excessive. So that means around about 50% people feel that China is spending too much money abroad. Just something interesting that I found. Now, here is a journalist. Let me just get this QR code out of the way so that we can read this carefully. Here is a journalist called Mu Chunshan. Mung Chunshan is a Beijing-based journalist, and he wrote a nice article for The Diplomat, from where I've picked up certain things. And this thing went a little viral, where he used a nickname for Prime Minister Modi. Uh, I will discuss that as we read forward. He says that the United States speculated that China would provide weapons to Russia, and this is something that we know. Europe and the United States are saying China will provide weapons to the Russians. And in China, what is happening is a lot of citizens are saying, yeah, as I why are we only being pointed out as the potentials to supply weapons to Russia, where India also has a special and a privileged strategic partnership with Russia. There have been more arm deals with Russia and between India and Russia than between China and Russia. So why doesn't the US suspect India of this? This is a chatter that he picked up of Chinese netizens actually discussing this particular thing on Chinese social media. And the Chinese people actually are quite in wonder that how did India manage this? Why is India's circle of international friends so big, and why do people hate China? So there's that little thing that how is India able to do this? Now, Narendra Modi's name, Prime Minister Modi's name was actually called Laosian. Now, Laosian refers to an elderly immortal with some weird capabilities. He's been able to do something magical as far as what Chinese say. And he says, they say that this is amazing than the other leaders of the world. And they point to his dress, his, how he is, and, this and that. He's got that aura about himself and this and that. So he says, India's led by Modi can maintain a balance among the major countries in the world, whether it is Russia, United States, or the global South. So this is what Chinese citizens say, and they're saying, yeah, this is damn good. These guys, they're not even as big as an economy as we are, but they're able to actually pull off all this stuff as far as diplomacy is concerned. Now, recently there is a perception saying that India has kind of besieged China by joining the Quad. The Quad started in 2017 after the Philippines earthquake and the tsunami and all that stuff. But it was like a dead duck for some time, and then it picked up and all that stuff. Then we know where we are today. So I won't get into the today's news and stuff like that here. So here is what they are confused about, that how is it that India is able to actually pull this stuff off. Let's get back to history a little bit. What is the 1962 assertion of China? Now, China always knew that USA, there were tensions. Of course, we know the Korean War that happened in 1950 to 1953, 54. Then you had the Vietnam situation heating up with the French already at war in Vietnam in the early 60s, late 50s, and the early 60s. And the Chinese knew there's a lot of Western influence within this region. Taiwan was obviously there. So they always feared a two front sort of a situation. Now, India was not very, very friendly. Of course, India thought we were very friendly, but they didn't think so. Now, they were a little nervous about their attack plans into India, and this has been uh, noted in a memoirs of a Chinese ambassador to Poland in 1962, Wang Bingnan. I'm sorry, I'm mispronouncing his name probably. He says that the U.S. supported invasion of China through Taiwan could happen. So now he's wondering. Now we've got these tensions with India, and you've got this another situation which forms into a two front sort of a situation for China itself, which is very interesting that the Chinese are thinking about that. Now, he met with his US counterpart called James Cabot, and he said US has no such intention. And they were discussing there is no such intention. And Wong actually said in his memoirs, he said that I can't believe my ears. How are they actually letting me know that there is no such intention when they know my intentions of actually attacking India at the moment? And it was like an assurance or a blind signal ki, okay, we will not do anything and we don't have any plans at the moment. So it was a look away sort of a situation from China when they had their plans. And this particular ambassador mentioned that this was a very crucial thing to launch the war against India. And China was very, very clever. It launched the war in the short time window between the Cuban Missile Crisis and declared a ceasefire as soon as the damn thing was over. So China was aware at that time of the geopolitics that could go wrong against it. Remember, India did not have bad relations with the US or anything like that. In those days, the things really went sour during 1970-71, where the entire thing played out. But there was initial cooperation between India and the US, and there was that all innate fear within the Chinese that in case we do this, the US might take advantage, or in case we do something else, the Indians might take advantage. Little did they know that our army was not capable, but at the end, at that time, not capable in 1962 because of various political reasons. But you can see the hesitance within the Chinese when they were trying to launch an attack. Now, the two front game I spoke to you about, this is something that was mentioned by the Chinese ambassador to India. There were there's a series of letters that were exchanged between the Indian leadership and the Chinese leadership uh, just prior to the 1962 war. This had started somewhere in 57, 58, and one of the most significant letters that the Chinese throw in front of our face was written somewhere in the 7th of September, if I'm not mistaken. I could be corrected. 7th of September 1959. So this is something which is very, very interesting. He wrote in his demarche to India that it seems to us that you cannot have two fronts yourself. Is it not so? Right. So it seems to us that you too cannot have two fronts. Let's make it very clear that the Chinese are communicating to India that listen, you can think of a two front with us, but you can also have a two front with Pakistan and myself. If it is, here lies the meeting point between our two sides that listen, you don't create a threat for me, I don't create a threat for you. Let's meet together. So, this was a demarche that was sent by the Chinese. Now, you know, this is another very interesting thing. The Pakistan China relations were not at that time very, very great. They had a border issue, as a matter of fact, which was resolved by giving the Shaskam Valley by the Pakistanis. Now, this is something that I want to ask that is it possible that the war was waged just to remind India that this is what can happen to you? One of the reasons could be in 1965, 19 September, when India Pakistan war was underway, PLA kidnapped and killed 3 Indian soldiers from across the LAC in Ladakh. Look at the timing. They were sending the message right after 62 as well, reminding you listen, you're at war there, we can also do something to you here. fearful of provoking China, and this we are very well aware, and sadly we know this. This is the reality of our country. We did not claim any of our territories properly. We didn't build infrastructure. We didn't do anything till very recently, right? So the recent efforts, and suddenly you started building roads and airfields and this and that. Chinese say, "Yaar, ye kya hua?" So it's actually pushed the Chinese anxiety a little further. Now, I spoke about 62. I spoke about what's happening around. And now let's talk about the time between from 1970 to 2000. And then 2 years before 2000, where 1998 we went nuclear. They were standoffs, right? So they kept reminding us of this. We had the war in 71, then we had the standoff in Tulungla in 75. Before that, we had 67, Latula, Sumdrongchu, 86, Dongzang, 99, just after the standoff. And this is just around the time of Kargil as well. All of them in Arunachal, right? This is a table that I found during my research where between 1987 and 2015, this tells us what the Chinese understanding of nuclear tests done by India is. Is India a nuclear power? Chinese say not legally, because you know that NPT nonsense. Uh, why did India develop nuclear weapons? He says because of a sense of insecurity and aspirations of a great power. So they are insecure right now, and in the future they look at themselves becoming a great power. Why is China mentioned as a reason for 1998 India's nuclear tests? Both to eliminate domestic opposition and the tests to the tests, and to help legitimize the test in the international community. 64, the Chinese actually exploded their bombs. 74, we did that. Of course, we could have done that much earlier. But in any case and scenario, 74, we did that. So they are kind of trying to compare this thing. How does India's nuclear program affect Chinese judgment of security threat posed by India? So they say, "Bhai, there's not much impact. We don't see it as a great impact to it." What impact did India's nuclear test have on China's security environment? They say first it incited Pakistan to conduct nuclear tests, and second, it resulted in a little more complicated sort of a situation in South Asia. So, what 30 years from 74, China never mentioned anything about the Indian nuclear weapon. They didn't consider it too much because India also projected it as a peaceful nuclear program and peaceful nuclear weapon. They said, we said, we don't want to propagate this and this and that. So, the Chinese also just left it aside. 64, they said, "Yeah, we've shown what we have." And they say the words that the Chinese use is head on blow to India. So that's why it's kind of in inverted commas. Chinese assumptions have always been, and even today, about India's limited capability, and they're not very sure about the intentions and this and that, and they always think that our intentions are more towards Pakistan because of ideological, religious, and a whole lot of other reasons. Regarding the capability in particular, number of missiles that India is pointing towards China is large, but then they say, we've got the technology edge. What will these damn Indians do? This is their understanding even today. So that's why one of the this nuclear thing is not mentioned much over. But I'd like to also mention that India and China both have a no first use policy. Now, India has a no first use policy with a policy of massive retaliation, as so does China. So, till now, both the countries have been more or less mature about their nuclear arsenal. They do tests and they do this and they do that and they do these little exercises and this and that, but nobody gives the nuclear threat to each other, and that's not happened between both the countries, unlike what we see between India and Pakistan, or Russia and America, or China and America for that matter. And there is that difference of maturity in the nuclear aspect which can be seen between both of them. Now, is this maturity being shown by China because it does not consider India a threat? At the moment, I don't think so. But till very recently, yes, that was the case. Now, between 2006 to 2008, there was series of standoff. 2007, they didn't want to, those were the times of those stapled visa nonsense that they were doing. They didn't give visa to a IS officer from Arunachal. He said, "नहीं नहीं, ये तो हमारा ही citizen है, इसकी जरूरत ही नहीं है." 2007, 150 transgressions on the LAC. It went up to 2,270 by the time it was 2008. 2009, Chinese soldiers crossed the LAC and stopped a road construction in Demchok. 2013, before Li Keqiang, and by the way, Li Keqiang, when he came in 2013, it was his first foreign visit. So it's not that they don't consider India an important country, right? When uh, Xi Jinping and his team came to power, Li Keqiang and all these guys, which have Li Keqiang, of course, is now not no more the premier. It's Li Qiang. Uh, it was his first international visit. But at the back of his first international visit, Chinese soldiers came into Depsang, and the Depsang standoff started. They withdrew after 21 days, but that issue has still been lingering. 2014, Chinese president came to India. PLA soldiers came into Trumar and they did all sorts of nonsense. 16-day face-off, and this face-off happened during Xi's visit in India. 72-day Doklam crisis, in 2017, and of course the recent one which started in April-May 2020. Now, what happened during this time of 2006 2008? What triggered this sudden increase? There used to be standoffs, but this is literally going up in size, and they've been more aggressive and assertive. Two major developments. One was the conclusion of India and US nuclear cooperation and the waiver of the NSG, Nuclear Suppliers Group. Now, of course, NSG we've not been able to get into because of Chinese opposition, but the waiver was given to India. So the Indian civil and military nuclear program was given an international sort of a recognition. And that is something very, very important that the Chinese did not accept at that time. So, for all the bravado that we don't consider India's nuclear weapons very, very critical and this and that, this did really trigger them off. Now, I'm going to tell you what the Chinese wrote about a whole lot of different things. This one is about the standoff in Doklam. Yin Gongmin, a Chinese foreign affairs analyst in 2017, argued that India, not Japan, is now China's second biggest threat after the United States. And he actually wrote this saying that, and this articles, if anybody wants, please do get in touch with me. I've got all these articles. I've created an archive for it. You guys, if you want to read the whole thing, it's in Chinese. You got to translate it and stuff like that, but it's there. China and India standoff has compelled to us to regard India as a serious rival. During the Doklam confrontation, it became very clear to everyone, from ordinary Chinese to foreign policy experts, China must reckon India to be its second biggest rival, and that China needs to reassess, re examine, and reformulate its India policy. So, 2017 was pretty much a turning point after 2008 when they started to talk about the factor of the Indian threat. Now, there is a US factor in the middle, right? 2006, 2008, sorry, we did the civil nuclear deal and everything. 2006, the Chinese ambassador to India in a media interview claimed that the entire Arunachal was part of China. Now, there were murmurs and rumors about this before and stuff like that, but they never said much. The main demand of the Chinese have always been Tawang, which is considered one of the seats, as per the Chinese, not actually, but as per the Chinese, of the Buddhist setup. So they want to have that legitimacy to hold Tibet. And Tibet is a big weak point, by the way. We'll talk about that. And this is in spite of the fact that in 2005, India and China signed an agreement which very clearly stated, and I quote, safeguard the interests of settled populations in the border areas. Right? So they keep doing this. And 2006 again, right? In 2016, let's go forward. India and US signed the Logistics Exchange Memorandum Agreement, right? So it exchange of logistics bases you could use in times of war and this and that, and for some maintenance and this and this and that. In the same year, US designated India as a major defense partner. And the very next year, what did we have? Doklam. 2017 was also the start of the Quad. 2018, USA and India signed the Communication Capability Security Agreement. And in 2020, we signed the Basic Exchanges Cooperation, which base are the two of the four treaties USA signs only with Mark my words, allied countries. 2018, US also elevated India to a strategic trade authorization tier 1, where we could literally start using American know-how and technology in certain areas in a license-free regime, right? And we have benefited quite a bit with regards to dual-use military technology, drones, some this, some that. Whole lot of things have actually happened. Look at this very carefully because the Chinese look at it in a very different way. US signs with allied countries. So China ke mind mein, there is a doubt that is India stepping into an alliance with the US. The Chinese media and Global Times and the People's Daily, both of them actually concise it. I've just put it across together. US's Indo-Pacific strategy and its relationship with India is a containment strategy directed against China. India, in its pursuit of global ambitions, is US using, mind you, US China rivalry as a strategic opportunity. This is what the Chinese are saying. All right. Now, we need to give ourselves a little credit here. We might not be playing this game. I don't want to get into that, but this is the reality. 90% of the time we say we are not proactive, we are not this, we are not. Okay, fine. I'll take your point, but your enemy doesn't think so. Right? Now, question that I want to ask the Chinese, and if anyone is listening, please do ask Xi Jinping and come back to me, is that does do the Chinese see the LAC as another theater of the US China competition? Because they feel that we are allied with the US in some way or something like that. They're crazy, and I'll show you how they're crazy as we go forward. What explains this standoff? Till now, what have we understood? Right? What have I covered? And a couple of other things. Indian economic rise, right? Well known. Growing military strength, fair enough. Decline of the military standing of Pakistan. We went and hit them in their house. I remember somebody, I think it was General Kulkarni, Sanjay Kulkarni, who um, was relating an incident that happened on the line of actual control somewhere, where a Chinese soldier walked up to, not a soldier, a Chinese commander walked up to one of the Indian commanders, and he posed the balakot and he said, you guys did this strike and all that stuff. So he said, yeah, these guys have been doing terrorism and all that. There was not that tension at that time. So he said, they've been doing all sorts of nonsense here. Yeah, yeah, we know this, that. The Chinese commander asked him point blank, I hope you won't hit us. So that insecurity obviously came in, that India's got a certain military confidence that it can use its military under the nuclear umbrella against a proposed ally of Pakistan or of China, Pakistan. Of course, India, as I said, told you earlier, military infrastructure, US relations, we've already talked about. Perception of China losing its upper hand. They're saying, yaar, ye US ke saath baith gaye, infrastructure le rahe hain, they're developing their military economy, they're going up. Whatever our upper hand was is slowly fading away. So what do? They want to put a whole lot of economic pressure on the system of India for faster upgrades, for public pressure. And they didn't think that India would stand up, right? They thought कि भाई ठीक है जो भी है वो पहले भी कुछ नहीं बोल रहे थे अभी भी कुछ नहीं करेंगे. So they wanted to put that pressure. They want to put that additional expense on towards the Indian exchequer, the Indian taxpayer. Now, this is a very old strategy, and I'll explain to you what this old strategy is. It's called the Danda strategy, of course. That's what the Chinese are wanting to do. Sorry, one second. China, for one thing, understands the sensitivity of this issue in India. Today, we know whenever something like this happens, everybody knows Indians are very sensitive about this, right? We say not an inch, right? So we are very sensitive about our boundaries, and we are very sensitive about whatever China is doing in Ladakh and in Arunachal. So they are aware of it, right? And yeah, it plays to their advantage. Keep poking. Ladakh 2020 crisis is thus an attempt by China to restore an equilibrium that India seems to have disturbed. All these things that I spoke about has been done by India, which reduced the balance. Now the Chinese have this concept of CNP, uh, right? It's the they talk about the factor that how is a country rated with regards to economy, military, and this and that. So as India is scoring higher and higher, the gap between India and China is going up. And by the way, sorry, I'm so sorry. The CNP stands for Comprehensive National Power. So they, this is again a statistic that the Chinese came up with, by the way, and they try and measure half the world. So they'll skew their figures in this way and that way, and say, ah, we are powerful. In any case, even if we take that as true, that thing is also squeezing short. Now, this is going to be a bit interesting. Chinese writings, right? They put the blame for this particular standoff squarely on New Delhi. They say, by Hindu nationalism, sinking economy, right, during COVID, lockdown, chalkdown. So they said sinking economy and worsening conditions due to coronavirus pandemic is the reason for India's aggressive behavior. They're trying to cover this up by pointing a finger towards China. Now, China's India policy, there are two types of policy. I spoke to you about the old policy and all that stuff. There are two types. There's one section of China that says we need to work with India, we need to cooperate with India, we need to induce India into cooperation, and let's not have an enemy sitting with India. The second part is the Maoist thinking. Right now, there are two sections in China, which is a moderates and the aggressives. The perception that the Chinese have given to the world that it has been the moderates that actually rule the roost. It is not. It is the hardliners that actually run the show, and those guys are known as Ying Pies. Okay, so Xi Jinping is part of the hardliner campaign. These guys are followers of something called the struggle. Now, Xi Jinping, if you know, keeps talking about struggle in PLA, struggle in food security, struggle here, struggle there, struggle here. This is a very Maoist thinking where they are talking about use of force, coercion, right? Getting stuff done, it really doesn't matter. In their mind, it says very 1962 ke baad, and this is what, see, this is the narrative that they want to build and tell India. See, 62 we had a war, we had a struggle and everything like that. After that, there was decades of peace. Now, which decades of peace? 67 we had issues, 75, 89, 99. I have given you this thing. So their own narrative has a big hole in it. On one part they write this, and the second part they write that. So it's a narrative of convenience for the Chinese. They just, abhi ye fit ho raha to ye laga lo. It's like Arunachal claim 2006, suddenly bhai Arunachal hamara hai. Okay. Chinese state media stuck to its official stance about the Quad and called it a paper tiger, a stillborn, a hollow strategy, bubbles in the sun, and doomed to fail. I've put the Chinese letters there for this thing because I picked it up from Chinese media. So when my friends, and I know I have a few in China who watch my shows, I'm sure they'll be able to read this. Now we know what they feel about this, and especially Trump came up and launched his free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. That they don't like. One thing they say is previously it was Asia Pacific, right? Today I was watching the Shangri-La dialogue which happened in Singapore, and I was listening to the Chinese defense minister uh, talking about it. He kept mentioning Asia Pacific because Asia Pacific was centered around China, and Indo Pacific, like we all know, is centered around India. They don't like that. They're moving away from the center of focus. How we are the middle kingdom and this and that. Now they used to refer to Quad as 3+1. They never said called it a Quad. They used to say 3+1. The plus one was of course us. Now they've actually started calling it a Quad. So this, remember, tells you the upgradation of the fear or the threat perception of India within their mind. From calling it a paper tiger to a 3+1 to actually the Quad, which is his given name, tells you where they are actually looking at. Now, Ambassador Yuan Nansheng, who served as a Chinese consul general in Mumbai, he said this in an interview. Amongst all the big powers, India does have the capability to balance China, given its geographic location, its military strength, and particularly having more than one aircraft carrier. It does have the capability to block the Straits of Malacca. For them, this is a big thing. Therefore, in the Chinese assessment, US, Japan, Australia are all seeing relying on India to a certain extent to build the pressure on China, causing a disadvantageous two front conflict situation for Beijing. Now, I'm going to just remove this slide and I want to full focus the screen on myself so that you can see my smile when I actually say that they wanted to create a two front war for India. And today, because of their nonsense with India, they find themselves in a two front situation. I'd actually call it they want to also create a two and a half front within India, right? We know what's happening around the place, and that's I'd also recommend to Xi Jinping, and I have covered this in my previous show about China, that please look at the 0.75 fifth of the percentage of a front developing within China. And we'll probably cover that in one of the episodes about the disgruntlement of the average Chinese citizen that he's going through. Right? So let's move forward. What do they say India doing? Okay, what do they see? What is the game? Kya hai? What is in their mind? And this is something that we need to understand to realize kya ho raha hai. United States and India getting together, Quad ban gaya. We've spoken about all this stuff. India consistently and publicly rejects BRI. They called us for the BRI, we said bugger off. They called us for the RCEP, we said bugger off. They call this aggressive, high risk, adventurous stand. And then they say this is spite of the factor that, Masood Azhar and all that stuff, we declared him a global terrorist after blocking him 3 times. We declared him. Xi Jinping's hub came to India. You still not here. What is this nonsense? You cannot be taking without BRI. So this is their arrogance. It seems of arrogance that we've done. We've blocked a global terrorist for you. You know what they do when they go to the UN, right? Veto, 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 veto. Now here is China, right? Now also they say that Modi government seems to be unwilling to shelve the disputed border. Every time anything we say border. वो कुछ आते हैं border, border, border. That's our narrative. You sort out that, we will sort out this. We will talk. Otherwise, बैठे रहो तुम. So we are ignoring them and they don't like it. So in their mind, India is now disrupting their neighborhood diplomacy, major power strategy, diplomacy strategy. And because of India, all this is coming to a test. That they're not able to control a country within its neighborhood, which is what a hegemon should be able to do, right? They want to be the unipolar guy in China, in Asia, and therefore later on in the world. So they're saying, yeah, India is now challenging all this. Now, they also talk about India's southward policy in the Indian Ocean. How many of us know this, by the way? I challenge you, a lot of us will not even know this. India's southward policy talks about complete control of the ocean up to 500 nautical miles beyond its shores, absolute control up to 1,000 miles, and uh, medium control up to 1,000 miles, and uh, milder control beyond in the region beyond 1,000 miles. Right? They also fear India will become an American eye, and they will be able to give America a whole lot of intelligence and this and that, which China is doing. Right? We are in the neighborhood. America is not. So we can collect a whole lot of intelligence that the Americans probably will not be able to. And that actually tells you if they have a fear, that means there is somewhere down the line our intelligence agencies are able to actually collect the kind of information our government needs about China. So let's not doubt our people that are doing this stuff, right? There is obviously something happening. And guys, this is something I am picking up from Chinese writings. Okay, I am not written this on my own. These are all Chinese writings for which I have enough links to give you. Right? I'm sorry. Ya Healing, the director of the Center of South Asia Studies in the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences 2020, wrote optimal state of China India relations would mean that bilateral structural issues between Beijing and New Delhi are resolved to, I can hear you guys echoing China's satisfaction, really, arrogance, and that India accepts China's presence in the South Asia under the banner of the BRI, and India China join hands to oppose US bullying and build a community with shared future for mankind, blah 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 blah, as if they care about mankind. But in any case and scenario, to China's satisfaction, right? So they see us by doing all sorts of things within our neighborhood and with US and with the Quad and this and that is disrupting Chinese plans. So they don't like it. And this is something that we've been doing since 2008. Started off with the nuclear, this thing, and a whole lot of things with our nuclear weapons, as a matter of fact. So, a whole lot of things that India has been doing that they find to be an irritant. Interesting, we should do more. In 2019, Yunnan University's Indian Ocean and Economic Political Review journal said that it is no longer possible for China to repel, and I want to clear my throat for this, a pompous and vain opponent like India, and its proactive actions by solely relying on bloodless frontier confrontations similar that to that happened in Doklam. They wanted 2019, guys. When did Galwan happen? 2020. This is interesting to me because the Chinese actually write. Now, if you look at this, the Chinese write it in codes and it's written somewhere here, there, and the other, but they write these things, right? So, the universities that I'm talking to you about, these are some of the main universities in China that do strategic analysis, along with the PLA and a whole lot of other things. Now, Galwan was a turning point, right? They thought by, you know, COVID के time पे, because China is down right now, our vaccine or India is taking advantage. Right? Then they also realize it's not possible for China to maintain stability in these relations by continuing its so-called cooperative strategy. China cooperates with India, right? This is again Chinese writings. China needs to reassert itself, as written by our friend right here, Yu Helin. Okay, so they want to reassert itself and they need to assert the Chinese superiority towards India. They need to say and they need to hear India saying, Bhai, you guys are superior. You can imagine the ego, that of the Chinese leadership that really wants to hear this from India. कि भाई आप बोलो हम बड़े हैं तभी हमको कुछ होगा, अदरवाइज यार हम क्या, हम तो गधे हैं. Tibet. This is very interesting. We don't consider Tibet as a great, pawn between India and China because we don't want to use somebody for our benefit like that. But the Chinese don't think so. The Chinese say, "Yaar, you are very troubling Tibet." They say that a volatile Tibet where successionist forces are being aided by India is a big worry for China. The Special Frontier Force is a big example. And of course, in the 60s, US and India were doing certain nefarious activities when the SFF was brought up. We had put in certain, measurements, and there was some amount of weapons and this and that going inside at that time. But I'm not aware of anything that happens right now, so I'm not going to get into that particular aspect. But not that we have blasts and this and that happening in Tibet. So we've not gotten into the terrorism act aspect of it. But they think that all the volatility that is there in Tibet is because of India. Right? So they think that this is a function of the Indian government. One of the reasons they say is because you've got the government in exile. Now you'll put on the new this thing, you do World Buddhist Forum, this, that, Tibet is the house of Buddhism. How can you do this? So they've got that arrogance to it again. The problem with the Chinese is if they stop thinking through their, nose up in the sky, they'll be able to probably see a little sense. But who will tell them? We are fighting for you and your territories is a narrative that the Chinese would be telling the Tibetans. And this I heard from a very interesting conversation I saw of Mr. Kapil Sibal, not Kapil Sibal, Kamal Sibal, one of the erstwhile foreign secretary. He brought this thing out and I found it to be quite credible. He said that they tell the Tibetans that, listen, this Arunachal is, South Tibet is your territory. We are fighting for it. Ladakh is your territory. We are fighting for it. We are fighting for your territories. So they are trying to subvert the population. They want to recruit a couple of Tibetans in the army, and we know that has happened already. The problem is that India is the birthplace of Buddhism, and they somehow are not able to digest that. The civilizational state. We've got an older history in India. How many Chinese temples do you see around in the neighborhood? Barely. Indian religions and Indian culture spread wide all over the place. Japan, South Korea, Mongolia, Russia, Middle East, all over the place. Southeast Asia, Angkor Wat, this, that, whole lot of things. They understand that. And they understand the erstwhile influence of Bharat. When we put that Akhand Bharat thing in our parliament, this is a message. We didn't own all the lands. We had influence. We had a Chakravarti system that General Narayan has very clearly explained in one of our videos. So, which is the influence of the return of Bharat. Please do watch that. That'll tell you a little more insight into this. In history, we know Chinese scholars used to come into India. How many Indian scholars went there? Very few. But they've written about their travels into India and what they saw, what they learned. The funny and the stupidest thing about us, and I'm sorry for saying that, is they, as the Chinese, know what we are worth as far as our civilization is concerned, but we don't sometimes. And we give it up. The Chinese today give a story to the US that you were born 200-300 years ago. For China, that is just a night's sleep. Right? So they say that to the US. They can't say that to us. So that's a big problem. They see it as a challenge. Now, what is the opposition? This is what the hardliners say. I told you there's a moderate section also in China. I don't believe that they run anything except for writing articles here and there and the other. But let's just see for 5 minutes before I take up your questions and stuff like that. I know, guys, this is a little bit heavy, but it'll tell you what the Chinese are thinking. And I will come down to the factor to show you the stupidity of this entire adventure. But let's go. I hope till now everybody is kind of with me, where I've tried to teach you, or tell you, not teach you, I mean, I'm also learning myself, tell you the Chinese thought process with regards to these standoffs and how they connected with India's growth, India's relations with the US and the West, and the various defense agreements that we've done with the US, how they consider that. One of the things that Chinese have started writing about today is the strategic autonomy of India. Before I get into the opposition, even the hardliners have said that, okay, the Indians are not supporting the Western thing in Russia. And that gives them some sort of a this thing, yeah, abhi theek hai, India is not, wanting to escalate anything. So let's just calm down. Let's not do anything. That's why you've seen a change in the narrative with regards to what China has been trying to say to India. What has been China trying to say is, by let's keep the border thing separate, let's talk, let's improve relations, and we'll talk about that and this and that. So let's see the opposition and we'll come down to that. Now, opposition made, there's a Chinese scholar called Zheng Yong. Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Zheng. Uh, Director of, I'm sure he'll do that with my name as well, so that's fine. Director of Advanced Institute of Global and Contemporary China Studies in the Chinese University of Hong Kong and Shenzhen. He says he's an advisor to the Chinese government, and he's lamented how Beijing lacks the understanding of a rising India and the importance to China. He's criticized the lack of recognition that the Chinese have with regards to the relationship between the two countries. And he's saying that this Beijing's India policy is being handled by incompetent lower level people, which needs to be finished. Those guys don't have a strategic intent. They cannot see beyond a certain thing. He also says that it is further emboldened India to pressure China. Right? And if we allow this to happen, and he's speaking from his perspective, that if we allow this to happen, India will become more powerful, have more strength, and it will be much more louder in its demands of concessions against China. We can beat, in their perspective, that we can beat an India that is weak, but as India gets stronger, things are going to become more difficult for you. As I said, India is reducing the gap, right? So they're not all Bevkoofs. They've got certain smart people, but nobody listens to them. India's rise is not necessarily detrimental to China's interests. New Delhi would never fully invest in the US, and they know this, that India will never get into any particular side. We didn't do it with the Soviet Union, in spite of the fact that the US had threatened us at that time. We didn't do that. So they're firmly of the belief, a certain segment of these people, that India will never ally with the US. And that's something India has very clearly said, that we don't want any alliances. You can become as many as partners. सारे आ जाओ, कोई टेंशन नहीं है. अलाई शलाई नहीं करेंगे हम लोग. They also have started understanding that, bossy, India is starting creating problems for you. India has cut off your supply chains, you're this, you're that. India has put off your making efforts to stop your CPEC and your MPEC and MEEC or whatever in Myanmar and Pakistan and this and that. They talk about India's covert efforts to hinder the Pakistani joint venture between the two countries. And it also talks about the factor that India is forcing the West to decouple and put that investment into India. They talk recently, I read an article in the Global Times where it was trying to hint the factor that India was the one who pushed the G7 to make China as the main topic for the discussion. And that's very low. I don't think that's how it went, but that's how they think. There are two strategists of repute: Li Jingli, the director of Institute of Security Research Center in China, and Sung Shi Ji, dean of School of Public Diplomacy. Right? They say that the group, they did a group articles, a paper sort of a thing, where they said that at a time when US and China economies are decoupling and Chinese have the economic pressure on them, New Delhi and China should have closer ties. Okay, so they're saying, yeah, we should use India's opportunity and the market and this and that for our benefit. The combination of Japanese capital, American technology, and the Indian neighbor force would spell big trouble for China. Now, I don't know whether this word actually means big trouble or not. This the Chinese characters mean big trouble or not. I put it on translate and it gave me big trouble to China, big trouble. So I'm sorry if the this thing, but it really means that it's going to create problems, right? So because the context can be different, so big trouble could be big issue, big problem, whole lot of things. So bear with me. Du Jiangao, a political commentator on social media, hundreds of millions of followers in China. I've heard of this guy, right? He says the Chinese leadership has put this country into a unfavorable two front situation. What have you done? Now, this is something me and General Ryan discussed when we said, why is China getting so desperate with India? They realize now you're in a two front situation. I can't move away from my troops from India, can they? Without breaking face. India will create a huge samasha about it all over the world. Hey, bhage, bhage, bhage. They can't do that. They need some sort of a face saver to walk back from the Indian situation. And you're also getting into a very heated sort of a situation in the South China Sea. So you're on a two front war. 60s, they wanted to remind us of our vulnerability of a two front war. And because of their fantastic strategic thought process, they've put themselves into a two front war. He also says that this is a greatest disservice to Chinese primary agenda, which is the reunification with Taiwan. Right? He's saying, यार तुम बेवकूफ उधर पे क्या खड़े हुए हो यार, हमको ताइवान के साथ लड़ना है. We have to take Taiwan. Why are you creating a fight over there? You first take this and then you do what you want to, which is logical. He's saying you're not that strong. India's as it is strong, getting stronger, and you sitting there now on his border. What is China trying to do? As I said, I told you, China is basically trying to shift the narrative. It is saying, "यार ये तो normal है, this is something that has come from history. Let's not spoil our today's relations because of this and this and that." What they're trying to do is strike a balance, which is called controlled conflicts, gray zone, right? They want to keep India under a certain amount of pressure. नहीं यार, हम तो तेरे border पे खड़े रहेंगे, जो करना है कर ले तू, right? So, and we're also saying हम भी खड़े रहेंगे, जो करना है कर ले तू. So it's a clash. The Chinese feel because of their superior economy, they would be able to stand it, and because the factor that India is not economically as developed as China, even in spite of the factor that GDP will be 8 trillion. But anyways, they feel that we will not be able to stand up and do it man to man and match to match, right? So I've shown you the opposition. I've shown you how China is now realizing that okay, we need to change our narrative here, right? I've shown you what the hardliners write. I've shown you what the opposition or the moderates are writing. Has China tried to listen to them, or they are trying to just control conflicts, as I mentioned? And I favor the controlled conflicts, the gray zone part of it. Well, when we did the episode on Manipur, I said that there is Chinese hand. I didn't mean that the Chinese are going to airdrop weapons, but the weapons are bought in China, in a city called Ruili. So they will do this to you, and this is what their game is. Now, I'm sorry, but a lot of Indian analysts and a lot of them will come around and tell you China does not feature prominently in Chinese strategy. Sorry, India does not feature prominently in Chinese strategic calculations. Now, I've gone back right to the 50s and I've shown you how the Chinese actually felt about India, where their vice premier is telling us, "Bhai, please remember your two front situation before you create a two front for us." Leave alone what they are in today, they they actually felt it right then. And the demarche that was sent in on the 16th of August 1959 by the Chinese ambassador is a clear statement. So please don't buy this nonsense from anyone, right? I've heard so many analysts and on YouTube and written this thing. Oh, no, 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 China does not consider India a threat. Really? If they did not consider India a threat, they wouldn't have been sitting on your borders right now. Let me just put that across very clearly. So it is stupid for us to actually not consider history and actually try and resolve something for tomorrow. And most of the people I've read in the past 5-10 days that I've been doing this particular research is that they all say this in India, especially, apart from a very, very few set of people. And I think those are the guys to learn from. We know better now, and I hope I'm able to communicate my point. If any of you want this presentation, guys, I'd love to share it, because this is something I want as many as people to know. We all talk about China, but we don't realize where China is coming from, and all of us are trying to make innuendo rather than actual ground facts. Brings me to my last slide: simple stupidity. And I'm going to explain you how. All of China's mega projects under the BRI, the China India Myanmar Secure Economic Corridor, a China India Nepal Trans Himalayan Corridor, Maritime Silk Road, which again includes India in its whole this thing. Everything is India. And this is not me saying, please go to their website. It's written there. China Pakistan Economic Corridor, we publicly oppose it, but in the long term, China says it is China, Pakistan, India, Iran, Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, Yevo, and all that stuff. The Tapi pipeline, they wanted to, they've done that little calculation and this and that, Yevo. That's what their dream was. They wanted to have a separate cooperation. China, India, India plus one, China plus one, SARC, SEO. Why is it that they've involved India in all these things, SEO, BRICS, and this and that? They wanted to do that cooperation. But of course, this fight between the moderates and this thing, and you've got Xi Jinping, who's a megalomaniac right there. 2018, there were writings, and I've read them, that talk about maybe as a concession to sort out stuff with India, let's remove our objection to India joining the nuclear suppliers group. Okay, the dominant narrative in India is China's policy should not within China is China's policy, India policy should not lack warmth and goodwill, because China India relations can still be improved. But as stupid as they are, you think they are working towards that? No. One of old veteran historian and so-called Indologist is a person who specializes in India. He said if China harvests peaches, India will surely return plums. We had no beef or qualms with working with the Chinese till 2020, when you put out that damn virus, spread it all around the world, and then you came and tried to stand and enter into our country. And then you have a fist fight with our this thing, where 20 of our soldiers died, and we all know how many of yours died. See, they also now understand to their stupidity that you've created a situation where the world is now focusing on the Indo-Pacific, and if there is a war between India and China today, their Indo-Pacific is gone. They know that very clearly. So they got themselves into a nice little cute little bind. That's why I said this is simple stupidity. Now India is now also saying, now we know, I'm sure our strategists know about this, and we are also being a little strong. We are saying, तू भाग जा यहाँ से, जो करना है कर ले यार. We will talk to the US. We will become Quad. We will do this. In Modi Saab has said, "Bhai Quad, idhar aa jao." They get pissed off when one of our ministers goes to Arunachal Pradesh. Modi Saab is gone. Home Minister is gone. Everybody's going. We are doing Buddhism summit. We are doing this. Everywhere. You please understand. The Chinese say, "Yeah, this is a country that never used to say anything. Now look what have we done." As I said, they're not all fools. So this is very, very interesting to me that they have actually created a situation for themselves that I don't think they have a break for. And I've given you a historical perspective as to how they got themselves stuck into this little bind. And now you're trying to change the narrative and say, नहीं 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 यार अभी उसको साइड में रख लो, ये वो and all that stuff. क्यों narrative बदल रहे हो भाई? If you are winning, then why are you changing the narrative? Or you're trying to fool India, huh? कि भाई नहीं नहीं नहीं, we'd be soft, but then we'll attack from somewhere else. करो, let's see what happens. You tried it in Yangtze, try it again. I'm sure many other standoffs have happened where you've gotten pushed back nicely. So what have you done? You started by a preposition of creating a two-front challenge for India, and over the years you pushed India into such a corner that today when you tried something, you've created a two-front situation for themselves. So the moot question today, why do they want to not resolve the border, is this whole plethora of things I've told you, and the basic simple thing which comes around at the end of it is that they will be heck embarrassed. After doing so much of hoo-ha, 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 you suddenly walk away, not going to happen. So this is the conundrum that the Chinese find themselves into. And leave alone their economy, which is in a pile of, you know what, leave alone their challenges security wise, leave alone their faulty equipments, leave alone their wonderful allies who are sinking one after the other, leave alone the waste of investment that they've done in terms of the BRI, leave alone the COVID pandemic, which seems to be touted to give in about 65 million cases a week, leave alone the factor that they were embarrassed by their fake vaccines where Indian vaccines were accepted, leave alone the factor that every country today in the global south considers India to be actually a leader. And today you in China wanted to be the part of the global north. Now you come down, nee, nee, we are also part of global south. So what have you done? Your so-called planned strategy and the Chinese way of doing things by thinking of it 1,000 years ahead and this and that has gone to the dump. Okay, so no, you are no more brainier than the Americans who are sanctioning Russia and the Europeans who are sanctioning Russia and Russian oil, then and coming to India to buy Russian oil to run their bloody furnaces. So congratulations, Mr. Xi Jinping and China, for being the smartest people in the world. We figured it out, and we're gonna beat you at it. Thank you so much for listening to me, guys. This is a whole story that I put up with you. I hope you liked what I've said. Whole lot of these things. If you guys want these details, please connect with me. Email is down below. You can write to me about this. I'd love to actually communicate with people about this. This is a logic. This is a theory, and this to me makes a lot of sense, right? To me. Now I want to know what you guys have to say. Before I do, guys, like, subscribe, spread the word with your friends, and yes, if you can, do contribute to the deftalks efforts. The QR code is right here, or you can become a member or send us a super sticker or a super chat. Let's get Bhavesh up. Thank you so much for the contribution. Let's go. Partha says, do they want America to feel satisfied that India, China are at loggerheads while C and Modi ji are secretly shifting power behind the scenes to BRICS? Let me tell you one thing about India and China both. They are stupid, but they're going to be pragmatic about this, right? They know that India can be the swing state, so they're not going to do anything in that particular aspect to dissuade and create trouble for India as far as the BRICS new currency basket and this and that is concerned. Let me assure you this, and I can write it down and give it to you. They're not going to do that. They know that this is the time when they need India. The economy of India, the gold reserves of India would be something that they would need to go forward. So let them try, because they're going to get a smashing right in their faces for it. And then it's going to create a whole lot of geopolitical issues. And let me assure you this, at this point of time, Putin will be telling Xi Jinping, भाई तू जो मर्जी कर, ये मत करियो. तेरे को तो करेगा करेगा, मेरे को भी बहुत तंग करेगा वो उसके बाद. ठीक है? So you please understand that. And there is a also very interesting thing which is going to come out in the future, is that the Chinese will need to decide. And I had done this show with Dr. Pooja Bhatt about this. The Chinese will need to decide which is the war that they can win and concentrate on that. You cannot fight so many wars around the place. India से भी लड़ लूंगा, ताइवान से भी लड़ लूंगा, साउथ चाइना सी में भी लड़ लूंगा, मंगोलिया से भी लड़ लूंगा, जापान से भी लड़ लूंगा, इसराइल से भी. You can't do that anymore. In the Chinese need to decide which is the war that they want to fight. Right, right. How will China behave with Pakistan? Oh, they behave normally. They'll give them some money here and there. They'll give them some weapons. They will take care of Pakistan. Don't worry, they won't let it sink. That won't happen. But the engagement that they had with Pakistan earlier would kind of reduce, because at the end of it, they also realize one big thing about Pakistan is becoming unstable. And if the Chinese keep holding Pakistan, that instability could transfer into China. One of the biggest reasons that they keep Pakistan on a ventilator and alive is so that the army protects the area of Gilgit Baltistan, which borders China. Otherwise, all the cohorts coming from Afghanistan are going to go into China. And tomorrow night, guys, stay tuned when I'm going to be talking to General Dushan Singh. And I'm going to ask a funny question. And I'm going to leave you with this. Is the Pakistan today becoming a buffer state to India? Right? We'll talk about that tomorrow. So, how is India going to handle trade defects? It's not much. We've got enough forex. We've got enough. It's not much. And today I've done a show on this, extensive details about India-China trade. So if you want more details, Kumar, you can actually check that out. But the trade is not that much, right? We are buying stuff that we need. Let the Chinese stop it. With their economic conditions, do you think they will? It's a double-edged weapon. And the recent American experience with regards to sanctions is something that the Chinese are reading very carefully. So it's going to be a problem for them, right? Naveen, can you also touch upon this? As China is thinking about India change post India's key moments, India's liberalization, nuclear liberalization. Let me take them up one by one. Liberalization, not that much. They didn't really care about this. Nuclear tests, yes, as I have told you. Civil nuclear deal, one of the breaking points, as a matter of fact. 2014 articles written about Mr. Modi somewhere around that time said that Mr. Modi is a very strong person and this and that, and Xi Jinping is a strong person. Both these strong people should be able to make something, and that's the moderates. The hardliners actually said that Modi will need to be bent down. There's only one leader in this neighborhood, and that is Xi Jinping. Post the clashes, I've already discussed with you that they found themselves into a interesting little knot. Are we clearly seeing China ramping up their side of the area for full-scale war? Sandeep Dhawan sir has been saying that we are already war with China. We need to act more proactive. I agree with Commander Sandeep Dhawan. We are in a simple little sort of a situation which is called grey zone war. They will not make it all out, but they will take it to a point where they need to just stop it just below war. Right? Now, why are they ramping up their side? Think of it in a different way. Can I just flip it around and make you think of it, Amay? That they are ramping up because they see certain gaps that they need to do. Isn't that what we are doing? We realize there are certain gaps in the LSE infrastructure we are building. Don't you think they're doing the same thing? Remember, having a certain amount of roads in that terrain is not really helpful. Your supply bases are nowhere there. Your supply bases are the other side of town, right? For them to supply their garrison sitting in Ladakh, they have to get it all the way from there. The manpower, the this, the that, everything comes from there. Our supply base is Leh, 200 kilometers line of sight from that region. An hour, 45-minute flight, tuck you there. Then you've got a huge base in Leh, which is a massive supply place. Remember, wars are won by logistics, right? The soldiers in front, the pilots, the naval sailors, all great. If they don't have the bullets to fire, so they are preparing, but they are also compensating for the gaps that they have. Remember, they have major air defense issues, right? So, and India has an edge over air power. So they're trying to fill up that. It's India's fault for not developing its industrial base and relied on China's industry. And even now, our import are pretty high. Your view on it? I just mentioned, yeah, you're absolutely correct. And I just mentioned how it is important for us at the moment, and we need to develop an internal industry to wean off that little thing. And we've started doing that in terms of APIs and stuff. So it's good. It's going to take time, but we need to be at it. Anikesh, after reading the survey, how China considers India as its second greatest security threat? As Akshay Kumar says in Holiday, ये डर जरूरी है, ये डर मुझे अच्छा लगा. Well, see, the factor about India being considered a threat is something that a lot of Indian analysts don't agree to, and I wonder why. Because Chinese have been talking about the Indian threat since 1950s, and I've showed you how. Uh, it's insanity that we will not consider ourselves a threat. If we didn't, I don't think they would be standing where they are today. So that's the biggest evidence of the factor that they consider you a threat. Look at what the Chinese said in the Singapore conference. They said India was no match to them militarily, and they were not worried about us at all. Their focus is on the US. They never said anything about India and the Chinese in the Singapore conference. I went through the entire statement of um, the defense minister, so I don't know where you heard that from. The Chinese laugh at our military industrial complex. They're not wrong. Our PSUs, with their lackadaisical and inept methods, has degraded the armed forces to a massive level. To an extent, I do agree with you, but they don't laugh at the Indian military, at least. Remember one thing here: you can keep producing good weapons. And I gave this as an example last time I was talking about Xi Jinping, Mr. SRDR. Let's say you're driving, I won't say Maruti 800 because you might just feel bad, but just for an example, you're used to driving a Maruti 800 or a let's say a Hero Honda 100cc bike. Suddenly, I give you a Kawasaki Ninja, which has 1200 cc's. Would you be able to drive it? Or you'll have three crashes before you take 100 meters. Remember, a weapon is as good as the soldier behind it. If the soldier is confident in firing an older class of weapon and he's able to use it up to its maximum potential and beyond, he is more effective than a soldier that has got a bright and shiny new weapon who doesn't know how to use it. The biggest example of this, ladies and gentlemen watching, is the 1965 tank battle where Lieutenant Arun Khetarpal won his Paramveer Chakra. Pakistanis used their brand new Sherman tanks. In some of those tanks, even the user manuals still had their plastic. So you can have a brand new shiny Navy. How far does it work? Only time will tell. Kasturi Muthana Sahab, you say that just take back the territory occupied by China if they make a move on Taiwan. That's one of the biggest threats that the Chinese feel today. And I was recently reading a Global Times article. No, sorry, in PLA Daily, there was an article where a person was talking about that the Chinese need to consider the factor that there could be a behind the back action against China if China actually invades Taiwan. So behind the back is, of course, what they're mentioning about. Now, this is important, and you've mentioned about very very clearly, very very interesting thing. Adi sir, the joke is communist China saying Buddhism is origin for China. यार साहब हम भी वहीं से आए थे यार, हम भी सारे इंडिया को तो पैदा ही चाइना ने किया था, पता नहीं आपको? We're all Chinese यार. See, the Chinese have this thing about creating a narrative about, oh no, this is ours. Oh no, this is ours. You know what does sovereignty mean to them? Sovereignty means to them whatever was bequeathed to them by their ancestors. So the area that was given to these guys sometime in history is theirs. That is sovereignty. And Mr. SR some time ago was mentioning about the Chinese laughing and this and that. Please hear the defense minister's comments. It's laughable. As a matter of fact, one I think is a Thai Navy or a Vietnamese Navy or one of Philippine naval officer asked him on his face that, dude, you say a whole lot of things, you don't do anything on the ground. In the question answer round, he didn't have anything. He didn't even answer that question. So I'd recommend watching the entire thing rather than just picking it up from somewhere. Or, anyways, Global Office 2.0 says if there were rumors that Xi Jinping fears that he would be thrown out of power if he continues, he will destroy China. One of the fear is coming true. I don't think the Chinese, the destruction of China is that easy. The CCP might get sidelined. I'll buy that, but there's going to be quite a challenge. So it's not that easy, right? Okay, now I'm going to answer you very, very clearly with simple logic, brother. If we have pushed back China successfully, why are we still holding talks? If we didn't lose any land or patrol zones, that why are we holding talks if everything is status quo? We never said that we've not lost patrol zones. Everybody says that, and that is a very open thing. You're probably not aware of it, and that's why you're asking. Let me tell you another little story. In Pengong, so they were right at finger four. I'm sure you're nodding your head. Do that. They were at finger four. What did they do there? They created a map of China. They wrote China on the ground so that when satellites come on top, they could picture that. That was a propaganda. This was available even on Google Earth. Kindly go to finger four after you finish the show on Google Earth and see if you can find that map and that China written there. If a country has to wipe off its own map and its own name from a piece of land that it's so called acquired and go back, guess who lost? Right? Okay, let's see. Adiji, Pakistan, Sindistan, Balochistan, Waziristan, all can be buffers. Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. One of the things, yeah, Amay, can you make a video on Chinese logistics in wartime on our border? It would be nice to understand. Absolutely, I can do that. I've done that about 2.5 years ago. Bro, but it's not overnight. It takes me a lot of research. So allow me some time, but I promise you this video will come out. One of the things that I want to talk about is that, a lot of people will tell you a whole lot of things. Oh, they've taken our land, this, that, and all that. Bum. Okay, let's be very, very clear. I say only one simple thing: trust the man in the uniform on the ground. Don't listen to anybody else. If you trust your army, that is what is needed, right? And I've given you a clear example of what has actually happened in Pengong. So, right, a lot of people will talk about Depsang mein wo yahan baithe hain, Raki Nala. It's damn easy to see on a map, man. 90% of the 99% of the people have not gone beyond 10,000 feet in their life, leave alone going to 18,000 feet and this thing. Before we comment about whole lot of these things, there's a whole lot of understanding that we need to have about what the enemy is talking about, and that's what I try to do today. What are our narratives? We know that. How do these two get together, and what comes out of it is something that we need to understand. I've shown you today the Chinese stupidity of the narrative, right? You wanted to fix India, but now India's fixed you in a two front situation, right? And one of the things I want to ask the so-called detractors in the world who say, "Oh, China's occupied this and that and the other," my dear sirs, if China would have occupied it, they would have been daloing bhangra over there. Global Times would have written that long articles to ensure that the psychological pressure within India is built up to force that victory home. The Chinese work on these games. The sheer factor that they've not done that tells you that they've not won. Remember, listen to your enemy as well. They sometimes tell the truth. Thank you so much, guys, for joining me. This was lovely. Trust me, this was so much fun for me to do this research. I really enjoyed doing the research. I really had fun reading about a whole lot of things. I've been doing this for quite a while to try and understand what is the Chinese narrative. What are they thinking about India? What do they actually write about India? It is something that we need to also understand, and I say this very often. We need to understand the enemy as much as or even more than the enemy understands us. Looking at this, clearly the Chinese don't understand us, and we must take advantage of this particular situation. I'm sure our senior commanders in the army and the political leadership, and of course the advisors to the political leadership, are aware of this. And if not, I hope they do watch this video and we all benefit from the information as much as it is around. Thank you so much for joining me, guys. Till next time. Tomorrow night, is Pakistan a buffer state to India? Jai Hind.